Letter number 1 in the d.MBA mailbag. Dear Alen and Franz, I've been reading a lot more about business strategy over the last 12 months. It's been particularly helpful to learn what makes a good strategy versus a bad one. I now realise that I'm subjected to what I think is bad strategy quite often at the organisation I work. As a problem solver and head of design for this company, it's hard to resist the urge to try and jump in and fix the process and outcomes that might be contributing to the bad business strategies. How do you think I should go about trying to influence the company to shift from a bad business strategy towards a good or a great one? Alan, do you want to start us off?
That's a great question, but it's a tough one. Yeah, it's a tough one. It depends on. So, do we have any context on the size of the company? We don't, right?
We do. It's a global company. There's about 150 people in the UK, but they are owned by a larger company which has tens of thousands of people. But this person is working in a business unit that's kind of a bit more independent, but still quite sizable. So I think they're probably having to deal more with that element of the company. But yeah, it has scale.
Right. And just remind me, this person is head of design or?
Yes, head of design.
Got it. Okay. So obviously the reason I'm asking is because the answer would be different if you're in a small startup versus huge corporate. And this one seems to be somewhere in between. And that's, yeah, it's not easy answer. I mean, in a startup, I think it's a little bit easier in this setup. I think what you want to do is basically first understand where you stand with your political power within the company. Because if the design maturity within the company is such that design is still seen as an execution arm, or even it's bundled below the marketing department, then I think it's just fighting an uphill battle that maybe you just shouldn't try to fight at this stage. Maybe then it's more about first getting design more say and then getting to the strategy bucket. Because I think ultimately, but if design is at the stage where you kind of have the say, also in more strategic matter, then I think the way to do it is through something that we call business storytelling. So what you can do is basically trying to now find analogies of companies who, so let's say you found a certain, like, let's say, a concept, or like you see a problem with the business strategy that your company has. The best thing to do is to try to find a company that did a similar mistake, and then try to kind of explain this through business storytelling to others. So the what is the business storytelling, and the nuggets are basically stories of other companies. And that works really well, like the same thing that works with user storytelling, it also works with business storytelling, and founders love to hear those things, and CEOs love to hear those things. And basically, frankly, the whole business school is just one big business storytelling. It's just like reading about business stories from other people and trying to see the patterns behind, because business is not a science. And so going back. So the what is the business storytelling? Still the tricky part is when and where, who do you tell it to, at what stage? And I think that it all comes to finding the right person to explain this to at the right moment. And this is probably not what most designers think. So the answer is not like, oh, I'm going to be in this meeting, the super important meeting, and I'm going to point to the table and say, this is wrong, and here is what we should do, because here I have a great render that's showing that blue color is going to help us, or whatever, like a different business strategy. It's more about like working your way through maybe lunch meetings and stuff, and just trying to go through one by one. So speaking to individuals within the company, trying to understand their point of view. And what we have to be aware of, last thing, Franz, before I hand it over, is that business strategy is not a thing that's just changed in a whim. It is usually, business strategy is a thing that companies don't change some don't change ever, because it's a fundamental decision you take. So don't expect it to be fast, That's a long answer. The short answer is maybe you should leave. Maybe you should leave your company. If you're not,
sometimes it's like I've done as much as I can do here, but yeah. I love the idea of it is a long play. It's got to have real patience, particularly at scale, and that storytelling piece is so powerful. But a lot of making relationships as part of that. Franz, any thoughts?
Yeah. I really like that this person says they know what strategy is, good strategy and the best strategy. And I think this is the nice thing to, let's say, deconstruct strategy in its parts. So as soon as we try to say, hey, I want to now redo our strategy, it's all like, that's like, no, you're not. But what if we could go after certain parts of strategy? And we know that strategy is trade-off decisions. And it's maybe not one trade-off decision. It's always one core trade-off decisions, but it's maybe a line of trade-off decisions. It's being different from other companies. Strategy also has certain parts when it comes to place, when it comes to activities. I mean, if they read this book, then that's all good. I don't need to go into more detail. But what I'm trying to say is, let's don't change the strategy. Let's change piece by piece and ask, hey, if we do this, what is the trade-off decision here? Mm-hmm. If we do this, how are we different from our competitor? If we do this, which place in the market do we want to hit? And this way we can basically impact strategy without impacting strategy as a big thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's really useful if you're not in the place to be working on the strategy, actually.
Yeah.
And secondly, it's also companies, from my experience, they're not usually working on strategy constantly, right? It's more that's set, and then kind of people know what to do, and then you work away, and then you're whenever you want to shut somebody off, you're that's not our strategy. But if you could work on things piece by piece, step by step, on sub questions where nobody even realizes that you're changing strategy, that's, I think, a promising one.
Just to build on this, totally, I think it's a great advice. Just don't use the word strategy at all. If you want to make the change, don't use the word strategy, because then people's guard, just goes up. And secondly, identify the main trade-off. For example, let's say it's a software company and maybe the trade-off is proprietary software versus open source software. That could be a strategic decision because you can't do both. It's either one or the other. And then, maybe you just need to go through implications of each decision for this department, for this decision, for business model, for everything. And basically just through argumentation, get to the reason why we should move from X to Y. And as designer, the thing we could bring to the table is maybe the user perspective. Okay, these are the business perspectives, why we should do this. But we also did research, and the market is telling us that actually this approach would work better.
Great. Really, really useful. And it's great that this person, they're a designer and they're immersing themselves in the world of business strategy. They understand the value of that. If you're recommending someone else follow this designer's path in trying to educate themselves a bit more on business strategy, any books, resources that you might recommend that come to mind?
I'm guessing the book they've read is Good Strategy, Bad Strategy by, I think, Rumlet. Mm-hmm. Then Blue Ocean Strategy, I think, is a must. What else?
I mean, they're both great. Slightly different in their approach, but yeah.
There's also a really good essay from Michael Porter on the difference between strategy. Basically, it defines strategy. I think it's called What is Strategy, and it's really important. It basically explains the difference between strategy and between being different and being better. And basic strategy is about being different, not just better.
great. Maybe we'll put a few links to that in the notes for this one.
Yeah. The last thing I would like to say, it's a short rant, is there was a few years back I went into, I got into a Twitter battle with two designers from, what was it? A huge VC-backed startup. And basically, I see Franz is smiling already. Do you know which one I'm talking about? No? So it was basically, the tweet that they wrote was like, hey, strategy is basically a plan. And my response was, strategy has a plan, but it's not just a plan, you know? And they were coming at me saying like, you're just trying to make it more complicated than it is. But it's like, no, strategy is not just a plan. And this is what a lot of people think it is. Strategy is making trade-off decisions, and this involves a plan. So maybe for those who are also listening to this and aren't aware of what the strategy is. So strategy is really fundamentally just about finding decisions where you need to make a choice between X or Y, and you can't have both. So it's a trade-off decision making, and that's why it's not merely planning, but it does involve plans.
Nice. Really good.